President.
Another senator from Vermont.
All right, we're running out of senators from Vermont. I think that's it. Mr. President, let me begin by thanking a number of my Senate colleagues who have worked so hard on this issue. Let me thank, among others, Senator Merkley, Klobuchar, Booker, Warner, King, Leahy, Durbin, Kane, and others for their efforts on this important issue. Mr. President, I will be brief because there is not a whole lot that I can add to the excellent statements that so many other senators have made, but let me just say this. For some, the issue we are debating today may seem complicated, to be understood only by lawyers, constitutional scholars, and those handful of people who actually understand the opaque rules of the U.S. Senate. So I just want to say that if that is what you think, you're wrong. What we are debating today is not complicated. It is really quite simple, and here is what it's about. Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election, period. You may have liked that result, or you may not have liked it, but he won. He won in an election that Donald Trump's own Department of Homeland Security determined to be the most secure election in American history. After the election, Trump and his supporters filed more than 60 lawsuits in state and federal courts, repeating their false claims and trying to reverse the election results. These lawsuits were rejected time and time again, including with judges that Trump himself appointed. Nonetheless, the former president continued to claim, and to this day continues to claim, despite all of the evidence, that the election was stolen and that he actually won in a landslide. Not only are his statements and actions delusional, they are worse. In repeating this big lie over and over again, he not only cast doubts about the 2020 election, but in fact, in a disgraceful and unprecedented way for a president, he is undermining the very foundations of American democracy. Shamefully, Republican leaders all across this country, including Republican members of the U.S. Senate, either repeated Trump's lies or tried to walk a very, very thin line around them. Trump's one-man dominance over the Republican Party is now so strong that few Republican officials are prepared to state openly what they know in their hearts to be true. And that is that Trump is a pathological liar and a threat to democracy in this country and our very way of life. In any case, the predictable result of all of this was that Republican governors and legislatures all over this country saw Trump's big lie and fear-mongering as an opportunity, a golden opportunity, to solidify their political positions. Acting under the guise of voter integrity, despite the fact that our nation has very little voter fraud, thank God, they proceeded to pass election laws in 19 states that make it harder for people to vote, with a special focus on people of color, young people, poor people, and people with disabilities, people who might be inclined to vote against them. In many cases, they also created election districts through extreme gerrymandering that have no rationale other than to make certain that Republicans retain control over state legislatures. In other cases, they are cutting back on the authority of independent election officials and giving that power to partisan legislatures. Today, in order to address this crisis in American democracy, members of the Senate will be casting two very important votes. The first will be the Freedom to Vote Act. And this bill goes a long way to end voter suppression and, in fact, make it easier, not harder, for American citizens to vote. It establishes automatic voter registration and online voter registration. It celebrates democracy by making Election Day a national holiday so that people can vote at a time other than after work. It establishes uniform early voting and same-day registration. This bill also ends partisan gerrymandering and roots out the undue influence of special interest money in buying election. Imagine that. Imagine that. We would actually know the names of billionaires who put huge amounts of money into super PACs that buy elections. What a terrible thing. We'd actually know who these people are. This bill would also provide increased protection in the voting process for voters with disabilities, the military, overseas voters, and underserved communities, and much, much more. This is a very significant piece of legislation. Now, why would anybody be opposed to it? Why, in a nation that has a history of denying the vote to African Americans, denying the vote to Native Americans, denying the vote to women, denying the vote to low-income whites, why would any fair-minded person be in opposition to make it easier for all citizens to vote? That's what I understood when I went to elementary school. You know, you play by the rules, you do your best, sometimes you win, and sometimes you lose. That's the process. But no one ever told me that what politics is about is working overtime to try to prevent people from voting just because they might vote against you. Our job should be to increase voter turnout, make it easier for people to participate, which is what this legislation does. I want this country to have the highest voter turnout of any nation on earth, not one of the lowest. But let's be clear. This enormously important bill, a bill to protect the foundations of American democracy, will fail. It will fail because, according to Senate rules, it will require 60 votes to pass, and in a 50-50 Senate, not one Republican will vote for it. It will likely get 50 votes, which, with the vice president casting the tie-breaking vote, would be enough to pass this legislation under majority rule. It will not get 60 votes. All of which brings us to the second vote, which is really the most important vote of the day. That vote will determine whether anything we discuss today, whether any of the speeches that we give, any of the points that we actually make, will in fact become law. And that is the vote to change Senate rules and establish a talking filibuster, a process which gives the minority an enormous amount of time to object to legislation and voice their concerns. The minority, whether it is a Democratic minority or a Republican minority, would have days and days and days to slow the process down, to rally the American people around their ideas. But they would not have forever. At the end of the time allotted, a majority vote would prevail, which, in my view, is what a democratic society is all about. Is changing the Senate rules a radical idea? Oh, my God. First time in history we're about to do it. Never been done before? Oh, well, really, not quite. No. As every member of the Senate knows, the rules get changed on a fairly regular basis. Nothing radical about it. Just a few months ago, in order to raise the debt ceiling and prevent our government from defaulting on its loans, the rules were changed. so that a 50-vote majority would prevail. We changed the rules appropriately, and we prevented a default and a massive worldwide depression. Just a few years ago, my Republican colleagues who were so adamantly against changing rules, well, my goodness, they changed the Senate rules to allow 50 votes to confirm the president's nominees to the Supreme Court. Oh, my goodness, how shocking. And they got 3 conservative Supreme Court justices as a result. Rules get changed around here all of the time. And maybe, just maybe, we might want to change the rules in order to save American democracy. Now, let me conclude by saying this, and I don't know if any of my other colleagues have made this point, but I will. I regard it as a very sad day for our country, and I mean this very sincerely, that not one Republican in this body is prepared to vote for this bill. Now, I understand why that is the case. I am in politics. I got it. I know who the leader of their party is. But this I do not understand. I can understand Republicans, but this I do not understand. I do not understand why 2 Democrats who presumably understand the importance of the Freedom to Vote Act, and as I understand it, will vote for the Freedom to Vote Act, are not prepared to change the rules so that that bill could actually become law. That I do not understand. If you think this bill makes sense, and if you're worried about the future of American democracy, and if you're prepared to vote for the bill, then why are you wasting everybody's time and not voting for the rule change that allows us to pass the bill? You know, it's like inviting somebody to lunch, putting out a great spread, and saying you can't eat. If you're going to vote for the bill, vote to change the rules. Mr. President, if we can change the rules to prevent a default on our national debt, if we can change the rules to confirm Supreme Court justices, we can certainly change the rules to save American democracy. Thank you.